I'm going to be kind of boring and sit here because I'm about 7 months pregnant, and you shouldn't be. I'm hoping you're going to get something out of the presentation and not just wonder whether I'm hyperventilating and I'm going to pass out up here, which is what would happen if I walk around. So I'm going to stay up here. If you have questions throughout, please do interrupt me. One of the rare opportunities to do so. Just yell out the questions, because a lot of personal finance, I work in a world where we can have a whole conversation about, 401ks and different, lots of different jargons. So if I'm going way above your head, let me know. And if I'm making this too basic, let me know that too. I do have swag up here. We have a little quiz at the end that is not actually based on a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So you don't have to pay attention to the prize at the end, but if you ask me questions throughout, you can also come up and grab something. It's nothing really to write home about, but hat, t-shirts, some pens, some fun stuff like that. So to do a bit of an intro for myself, in context of what you should know about anybody who's giving you money advice. What's your expertise? So I have been writing about personal finance for almost 15 years now. I graduated from Ithaca in 2004 and dove right in to be working at MarketWatch, then Smart Money, which became MarketWatch again, and then at CNBC. I went back and got a master's degree in personal financial planning because I like the subject matter so much. And then I passed the exam to become a certified financial planner. It's a pretty tough exam, and there's not many working journalists that have earned that certification. And it's always a good idea to understand what the expertise is for somebody who's giving you money advice, simply because there are a lot of bloggers out there. Some of them are great. Some of them are really basing it solely on their own experience, which might not match up with yours, which means their advice is maybe more or less useful for you, depending on the source. How do you make your money? Always important to ask a financial planner or anyone else you're paying for advice for, where they're making their money. A lot of them you're going to be paying for their time. Some of them they're going to be paying by commission. So if they sell you something in particular, they're going to make some money off it. It's not to say that you can't get a commission on something, but it would make you think twice if I told you that I was recommending something and I got $10 for each of you that signed up for it, versus if I had no skin in the game. So to know for me, specifically today, I make my money from CNBC writing articles. You can't hire me as a financial planner. Nothing. I can't give you any individual investment advice today, and I'm not here to sell you anything. So take that for what that's worth. And then, are you a fiduciary? That's an important one, especially with any professionals, because any different advisor, broker, person you're working with is held to different standards. A fiduciary standard essentially means I have to put your interests ahead of my own. If you ask me about something that I don't know, I have to tell you that I don't know it. If you ask me about a particular service that I can't offer, or something that I don't have that expertise, I would have to tell you about a product that you could get elsewhere, or a person that you should talk to, even if that meant that I was not making any money or was actually losing money by losing you as a client. So CFPs are held to a fiduciary standard. There are a few other groups that are as well. Some others are not. So just a quick, hopeful point of interest here on why it's important to be asking a lot of questions about your money as a young person. Nobody else is going to care as much about your money as you do. So if you don't ask, nobody else is going to be volunteering necessarily the right information. This is a field that changes very, very quickly. If you were to buy a car now, you'd be doing something different than 5 years ago. When I graduated from college, I followed a very specific set of advice for handling my student loans. None of that would be useful at all to you guys these days, because the loan environment is very different. You have different amounts of student loan debt. I had variable rate loans, and they were very low at that point. Consolidation made sense for me. It's not going to make sense for you. So always think about what you don't know. Just embrace that you don't know it, and go out and ask the right questions. And revisit what you think you know, because the field is always changing. And one of the things they asked me to specifically talk to you guys a lot about here is budgeting. How many of you have actually budgeted in your lives? How many of you think it's pretty close to like a 4-letter word? Either diet or like the curse word variety? Nobody's raising their hands there, which is unusual. Usually when I talk to groups of employees about budgeting, they all hate it because they all equate it with deprivation. They think about the stuff that's pictured there, the latte factor, the avocado toast. It's the reason nobody's going to be able to buy a house, supposedly, but really that's not true. So the first thing really to think about budgeting is it's more a matter of where is your money going. You have to understand where your money is coming in and where it's going so that you can figure out how to make the most of it. So the first thing you'd want to do is be thinking about some sort of an app or a system that helps you better track your cash flow. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about what exactly you look for in one of those apps. But once you know where it's going, that's going to help you make better decisions. Most people, they tend to estimate, and their estimates are way, way off. Once you know where it's going, you think about prioritization of where do you actually want it to go. There's this 50-30-20 rule that's out there. It's not a bad rule of thumb, like any other rule of thumb that's out there. There's going to be some wiggle room where you think about what it means for you. But essentially is 50% of your money should go toward living expenses and essentials. That's all the stuff you have to pay for in a given month. 30% on discretionary spending. That's the fun stuff, anything you have some flexibility on. And 20% towards savings and long-term goals. So that's the breakdown there. Once you start thinking about cutting, before you go into the stuff of saying like, I can't buy coffee anymore, I can't, go out to the movies, I can't go out drinking, think about saving strategies for those big recurring bills. And you're going to have a lot of them once you graduate. Everything from, can you negotiate a better rate with your rent? A lot of landlords are open to that. Are you getting the best deal on your cell phone bill? If it came down to it, and I said, you could, cut $50 from your monthly budget by changing your cell phone plan or by going out one night or 2 nights less, which would you rather do? This is the stuff that's going to be the easier stuff to cut in a lot of cases, and it's going to give you more freedom before you start saying, like, I have to just stay in and spend my money on nothing fun. Once you go through all those big bills, that's when you want to set your goals to reduce the discretionary stuff. So again, think about how you can spend smarter versus, cutting first. There are a lot of interesting websites out there, like where you can buy secondhand gift cards, for example, so you can still go out and buy the things you want to buy. You're just getting a better deal on them. Rewards programs, another way to do it. And then you can kind of think about where is the money going and how do you trim that back. And it's always about prioritizing. I was saying to one of the other folks in the audience earlier, I've got a 2-year-old. You will prime my coffee budget for me, from my cold dead hands. That is the last thing I'm going to cut. So don't let somebody else tell you what that discretionary, wasteful expense might be. It's going to be different for every one of you, what you think is more important to spend your money on. So you can decide how you're going to prioritize that and how you're going to split that up. And then when you find extra money in your budget, think about the best way to use it. That may be, allowing you to do something fun. It may be, if you have other goals like building an emergency fund, which we're going to talk about, adding to your savings goals, paying down debt. That could be extra found money that actually helps you do that and go back to that sort of 50-30-20 rule of how you're spending things. So that's a good way to be splitting that up. In terms of picking budget tools, so you should all have, and hopefully they made the rounds, the resource sheet of some of the stuff that's out there. If you don't have one, there should be extra somewhere, I hope. There's a huge stack of them. Worst case, then drop me an email and I will send it to you. But interestingly, so I did this presentation last year and we listed a whole bunch of apps that are no longer there in existence. So this is a new crop, but it does tell you how quickly a lot of these companies change over. Always worth thinking about when you're handing over this much information about your money to somebody, what are the different strings attached? So cost, there are a lot of these apps that are free. Some of the budgeting apps, like youneedabudget.com, you're actually paying an annual or a monthly fee for the software. The thing to keep in mind is, if they are free, you are the product. They are monetizing you in some way. That might mean they are trying to sell you a credit card, for example, or that they are selling your data. So you need to think about how comfortable you are with that, doing a little bit of digging there. I routinely get pitches in my work for CNBC from a lot of these sites and others that really want to tell me how much the user spends on this or has saved toward that. So be sure they are definitely paying attention to the information that you give them, whether or not you think you've agreed to that. Privacy is a big one for that very same reason. Security, what are they doing to keep your money secure? You're handing over, in a lot of these cases, passwords, account numbers, other information for them to be able to track your money. So what are they doing to keep that safe? Because that certainly is very valuable information. We know hackers are looking for a lot of that. How are they securing it? Effort is a big one. Some of them are easier than others when it comes to tracking cash transactions. So if you're using a lot of cash, you want to be weighing, which is the right one, or that might make that easier. One of the complaints in our office is often that these apps will put transactions in weird categories. So, and that might just mean suddenly all of your spending is miscellaneous and you need to go in and sort through it and tell it, no, actually that's a retail transaction, this is groceries, because it doesn't necessarily recognize the retailer or the company you're buying from. And that, frankly, is a pain. Features. All of these have different gimmicks or things around them that helps you better see how much money do you have to spend that's free. How are you doing on tracking your spending? Are there alerts that you can have sent to you? Different things like that that make it easier, or maybe annoying to you, depending, to help you manage your money. And then reputation. Always look at the reviews that are out there. A lot of them are particularly glitchy. If you have, say, Android versus iPhone or vice versa, that you want to know before you sign up and hand them all this information if it's something that's going to be useful to you. And in the end, the best tool is the one that you're actually going to use. So that's why you want to be thinking about all these different things. The right system for you might be different than the one for you. And there's also, you can go low tech with something like the envelope system. That's simply where you take out your cash for the month, you put it in different envelopes, and when the grocery envelope is empty, well, we'll hope you have some extra from one of the other envelopes you could take to buy groceries. But the idea would be that is the most spending you can do on your coffee or your dining out for the month. And those are some of the big companies that are out there that do that and do different versions of it. Rainy day funds. I mentioned emergency funds earlier. Does anybody here have an emergency? 2 days ago, got a flat tire just before driving up here. Tax payment I have not had, but I do own a home, and we have had 2 home-related emergencies. So we are right kind of in that line of the $1,500 per emergency. I'm set up for it, but yeah, it does happen, and it is a total pain. So you want to be thinking about having cash savings. And I know it's tough when you're talking about all these different budgetary demands, especially as someone just coming out of school, you've got student loans, you've got a lot of other things you're trying to juggle. Even just a little floor of like that $500 can make a big difference in how much you have to put toward, if there is an emergency, if you have to pull out a credit card. Usually when we talk about emergency savings, there's this big bucket. Planners will tell you you need somewhere between 3 and 6 months worth of living expenses set up in cash. You guys can kind of do the math on that one. That really can be a substantial amount of money. And in some cases you need more, and in some cases you need less. My husband is a full-time freelancer. Sometimes he doesn't get paid on time. So we have a much bigger cash cushion for him because he's got to chase down some of these employers and get paid. And it's nice to have that extra money in there. If you are married, that's one case where maybe you need a little bit less because you've got 2 people and it's very unlikely that both of you would say lose your jobs at the same time. But it's all about that balance, and it does take time to get to obviously those thresholds because they can be big. But even just to put aside a little bit of money every month, $25 here or there, that does really help you if something comes up. And there are other things you can put in place too that would help for some of these particular, like these are the 3 most common emergencies: the medical, auto repair, and tax payment. Thinking about things like having good renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance helps ensure that if there's something like a broken pipe, that's not as financially devastating as it could be. AAA, huge lifesaver if you've got a car that tends to break down, that could pay for itself in one phone call. And with medical, having things like taking advantage if your employer offers something like a flexible spending account, you get to pull money aside out of your paycheck pre-tax, that can be a great way to head off some of these unexpected medical bills. So think about that as a real priority if you're going to save for anything. This is a good thing to put aside money for it. Work perks. I want to talk about this in terms of budgeting. If you end up working for particularly a large company, but even a smaller one, really go through all of the employee benefits that they're going to maybe hand to you in a packet when you first start, or in my case, it's buried on the employee website, that you really have to do some digging and look to find, because there can be some truly valuable things that are in there. Tuition reimbursement is a big one if you're thinking you want future training, you eventually want to go for grad school. My company offers up to $8,000 a year. That was how I got a graduate degree for under $5,000. Took me a little longer, but got it done. Fitness deals, if you want to join the gym, you have a particular yoga class you like, Pilates, anything like that. Oftentimes fitness deals are a big part of it through your insurance company and your employer. You'll get a better rate on that monthly membership. Cheaper self-service. The routine for a lot of companies ends up being it's about 20% off your bill. It's not the whole bill, it ends up being mostly like the data and the phone bucket. Still worth asking about. That helps you create a little more room in your budget. Insurance discounts for everything like homeowners, car, worth looking at. And that even is very popular with smaller companies as well. And that could be, extra 10 to 15% off, in terms of different big retailers that you might buy through. Some of them, they do it where you're shopping through a dedicated website. Sometimes you're getting cheaper gift cards you can use in store. Nice way to add some extra money. Student loans. I know there was a whole other presentation going on in student loans at the same time here, but so I assume anybody who's got some serious student loan debt may be over there. Does anybody here, are you going to graduate with student loan debt? Yes, okay. Yeah, it's pretty much a given at this point, but so for student loan debt, obviously that's going to take a big bite out of your monthly budget for most folks. And there's different things that you can do to make sure that you're managing that well. The first thing you need to understand is the different types of loans you have. So really write down what kind of loan it is, the rates, get all those details. And it sounds like it's basic, but surveys have shown it's about 40 to 60% of borrowers don't actually know this stuff about their student loans. So if you don't know what the rate on your loan is going to be, you're not alone on that front. And that's all going to determine the steps that you might be able to take to help with that. If you have federal loans, alternate repayment plans, very popular. There are right now, I believe, 6 or 7 of them that you can take advantage of, everything from extended repayment to some of the different pay-as-you-earn and income-based plans that might get you forgiveness eventually. If you have private loans, there can also be some different payment plans that the lender will offer up to you. That landscape is always changing, and which loans are eligible can be a little dicey, so you want to check the details. One of the websites that's on the resource sheet, it's can't even speak today, gives you the details on all the loans, and that'll help you figure out what you might be eligible for. As I mentioned before, back when I was graduating, one of the first things you did was consolidate your loans. So I'm on a 15-year repayment plan and just about to zero mine out next year. Refinancing is something that is big. You'll hear a lot about it. I would put it down as a maybe for a couple of reasons here. One is you'll see these really low teaser rates, which is great. If you could get that, that could save you a lot of money. But as a new grad, your credit is not going to be established to the point where you're going to end up getting that lowest rate that is on offer for the most part. You're probably going to end up with something that's at least a little bit higher. Still might be worth looking at, but you have to also understand what that's giving up. When you refinance, you're taking all of your loans and you're kind of bundling them together into one new loan. It's going to be a private loan. So you're losing out on any of those federal benefits that you might have had access to. Things like forgiveness would be a big one. A lot of the different things that are out there for deferment and forbearance, if you have problems paying your loans, that's all going away. You're subject to the terms of that new private loan, which may be okay for you, but you may be able to look at your situation and say, I might need some of these benefits down the line, that you would rather look at other options rather than refinancing. And with refinancing, you also, if you have multiple, assuming you have multiple loans here, you don't have to refinance all of them. You can pick and choose. So it's not necessarily that we're saying, it's all or nothing. If you want to leave some of your loans out, you could do that. Talking about a popular program is student loan reimbursement or student loan help. That can be anything from, if you were thinking about refinancing, maybe that work association will get you the better rate. Some companies just flat out will give you money to help pay for your student loans. So it's always worth asking about that. And then speeding up payments. If you don't have credit card debt, can definitely help to throw some extra money at your student loans if you want to do that. The thing you need to understand about that is there are a lot of different regulations on how companies process extra payments that you give them. So if I give Navient, my student loan servicer, an extra $50, my balance is not going to go down by 50, sadly. They have to, by law, pay certain things before they can pay down the principal. So they're going to pay any interest that I might have accrued at that point. That gets paid off first, then the loan balance gets reduced. There are some fees and other things that could come into play there as well. And also know that this is an area where student loan servicers tend to screw up a lot. I've heard a lot of stories about it as a reporter from folks that I've had to help work through this. It's one of the big complaints to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So you want to be very mindful if you're giving them extra money that you're doing this properly. Call them up, see what you need to do, and get a thorough understanding of how to best take care of that. But I mentioned credit card debt in there. That's certainly, if you have credit card debt and you have extra money, that's almost always going to be your better bet than paying down your student loans first, because credit card debt is super expensive. Depending on the card at this point, we're seeing averages, somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 to 20% for most cards. Store cards can be even higher, in some cases upwards of 30%. So if you have any of that debt, try to knock that out first. Two big rules of thumb there, or strategies. The avalanche one, when you're listing out your debts, sort of going from highest to lowest interest rate, that's going to save you the most money because you're paying down the most expensive debt first. But snowball, that's actually a few things that academics have done studies on, where they look at people who have paid off a smaller debt first and then they work their way up. They say there can be a psychological win from knocking out some of those smaller debts, and it does give you one less monthly minimum that you're trying to pay every month. So it's worth thinking about, and in the end you just have to list out your debts and see which one you think you want to tackle first. Retirement is, of course, a big one that you need to be thinking about when you're young, because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to catch up on this. If you look at it's the chart on the right there. So for folks, if you were making a paycheck of $1,000, sort of contributing 5% instead of 1%, you're not going to see that much of a big difference in what your ultimate paycheck is. For the most part, you're talking about pre-tax contributions, something like a 401k. So this is a nice way to hit that, savings goal of, maybe putting aside a little bit more. You're paying less in taxes, and in the end, you're still able to take home quite a bit of money to be able to meet your other bills and your goals. Missing out on the free money, it's still something that it's about 1 in 5 employees does. And in some cases, it's because they feel like they can't save enough. Always worth assessing your budget for that. But in a lot of cases, it's because these formulas that employers use can be a little tough on the wording. It'll be something like the company will match 1%, and then it will match 0.5% for every 1% you put up to 6% total. So it's sort of like you really have to think about that for a minute to kind of go like, but how much do I have to put in to get the full match, and how much am I really getting? And sometimes they won't match on certain contributions, but they will match on others. So you have to talk to HR and talk to benefits and get a sense of what the formula means and what it boils down to. And make sure that you're not missing that money. Because it does really, that adds up over the years. Avoiding cashing out, something we see particularly from younger workers who move jobs, is that they will either be handed their money back, essentially out of the 401k or the other workplace plan if they don't have a lot in there, or they might just be given the opportunity to take it. And when you're talking about a small balance, maybe $5,000, $15,000, it's really tempting to do so, because you can kind of go like, wow, that's my moving cost, that is, pays off the car loan, that's a nice chunk toward the student loan debt. But when you're talking about money that you've put in when you've just graduated, sort of that first 10 to 15 years, that money really has a lot of time to grow, and that can make, in the end, a big difference. Fidelity had done some numbers, it was a few years ago, looking at if somebody were to cash out a $15,000 balance, you're paying taxes and a penalty on that. So you're probably walking away with close to $10,000. If you had let that money grow, never added to it, never touched it, and it just sat in the account, you'd probably have close to $85,000 to $90,000 by the time you retire. So that's a nice chunk of change had you just let that sit there. And then taking advantage of tax breaks. You're going to be able to save some money on taxes just by contributing, but they also have something called the Savers Credit for retirement. And it comes into effect if you're making, I believe the threshold this year is $38,500 roughly. So you'd want to check that specifically, but that's actually a nice tax credit on top of any of those 401k or IRA tax savings you're seeing. That you get some extra money back on your taxes just for having saved for retirement. It's a nice thing to take advantage of if you can do so in the first few years when you're out of school and maybe you're not pulling in a high salary quite yet. In terms of those benefits of saving early, so two things, get up this one. Try not to knock anything over. So this is a pretty good example. Like when we talk about how much do you need to save for retirement, the rule is like 10 to 15% a year if you're starting early. So this is a chart from the Boston Center for Retirement Research. They do a lot of really in-depth retirement research that reporters like. So if you were aiming to retire at 62, start at 25, you need to save 15% of pay. Wait, that goes up to 24. So if you think 15 is painful, 24 is super painful. 44%, if you really kick the can forward, that's not going to be fun at all. And then you're going to start getting into other problems about how easily you can accomplish that. So that's a big problem. But to look at the power of compounding, since you guys are young, if you were just to start at 25, keep on saving pretty consistently, that's a nice chunk of change for retirement. Even if you just contributed for the first 10 years, you'd still have more than somebody who started saving and saved consistently from age 35. So time is money, and you guys are young, so you can really have that advantage in putting time on your side.
So when you say start saving money, you put it into which, like the 401k and the IRA?
So where you would put money, it depends a lot on where you're working. Or, if you've got a typical big office job, you're probably talking about a 401k. Teachers have something called a 403b. If you're self-employed, you have some other options, including, like my husband has a SEP IRA. And then on top of that, you also have access to an IRA. Everybody has access to that. And whether or not that's deductible depends on the type of IRA and how much money you make. And there are two big, when you're talking about savings, usually so for an IRA, there's a regular IRA and there's a Roth IRA. Regular IRAs, you're putting in money and you're getting a tax deduction up front. The money grows tax-free, and then when you go to withdraw it, you're going to pay taxes on that money. With a Roth, you are paying taxes up front. It's actually a great tool for younger people because you tend to be in a low tax bracket anyway. So you're paying that tax money up front, then it grows tax-free and can be withdrawn tax-free in retirement. Roths have income limits though, so once you make a certain amount of money, you can't contribute directly to it. There's some sort of back ways in there, but that gets a little too complex for what we're talking about. Something else that's good to know though is a lot of employers now have a Roth option on the 401k. So if you were willing to pay some taxes up front, you could also look at something like that. Another really good reason to understand what's going on in your 401k. John Oliver has a video that I would recommend taking a look at. It's a few years old now, but he had done something on retirement fees and different problems within retirement plans. High fees are another thing that can really hurt you, so it's another good thing to pay attention to within your retirement plan. The higher the fees, the more that bite that takes out of your balance. The other thing I wanted to talk about is credit scores, because usually when I do these, I initially start out, we have one slide here, and then we talked about it for like 35 minutes in one presentation, because people had a lot of questions about it. So now we've got a couple of slides and hopefully a little more thorough on that. How many of you know what a credit score is? Okay, cool, good group. How many of you know what your particular credit score is? All right, a few less hands, but still, a lot of the room, that's good. So credit score can be a pretty important thing. Having good credit makes a big difference for everything from when you're trying to get a job, you're trying to get an apartment, and of course when you're trying to get various types of credit. Credit scores are based on your credit report, which you can see, the most legit site is annualcreditreport.com. You want to look for errors and ID theft. There's a link on the resource sheet. I've done a piece a few years ago, just basically going through your credit report and sort of saying, here's what you look for and here's what you want to pay attention to, because It's about 1 in 5 credit reports has what they consider a serious error on it, something that would maybe influence your ability to get credit or at what rate you're able to get credit. So it's worth taking a look at that, especially before you make some sort of a big move, not just buying a house, but even if you were to, say, refinance your student loans. This would be something you would want to know about your credit in advance. And you can see on the right, that's some examples from FICO. If you were to try to get something like a mortgage, big differences in terms of where your score falls, how much interest you'd pay over the life of the loan, and what some sort of even a minor score improvement could save you a couple $1,000 over the life of a loan. And the way the score ends up working is, so it's one number between 300 and 850, but it's not just one number. That's the thing that kind of kills people. There are a lot of different places you can check your score now for free. Again, some resources on the website. And if you were to go on now and check all of them, you would end up with different numbers for almost every single one, because there are literally dozens and dozens of scores depending on the type of score formula, FICO, Vantage Score, lots of different proprietary ones within there, whether it's based on your credit report from TransUnion or from Equifax or from Experian. If you were pulling your score because you were thinking you wanted a credit card versus a private student loan versus an auto loan, a lot of the lenders will have particular formulas that they apply to that. So use it as just a jumping off point. This is going to tell you broadly if your score is okay, great, or pretty awful. And they're also going to tell you within anything that you use to check your score, they're going to give you some advice on why your score is what it is and what you can do to improve it. And some of it is unfortunately just time. If you had something like a late payment or you're just new to credit, those are things that over time that's going to get better. Usually the fastest thing you could do to improve your score would be to pay down any debt you have. If it were that easy, we would all have amazing credit scores, thing that you can do, just that easily. But do kind of pay attention to that. Payment history is a big one, and yes, your student loans do show up on your credit report. They are factored into your score, so being a good student borrower there is going to help you out over time. And now we have our random quiz. And unfortunately, I don't have money to fling at you, but, and I'm not going to fling anything here because inevitably I will hit somebody and it will not be good. So if you made a one-time investment of $10,000, age 25, it earns 6% a year, how much do you think you'd have when you retire at 65? Anyone? Yes? No. I know, we're just going to quickly run out of numbers or letters here. Yes?
D.
It is not D. It is A. Come on up and grab something. I know, I need more numbers here. So A is what you would have if you started at 25, or if you just had that one-time money to invest. B, for perspective, is what you'd have if you just put that money in at age 35. So, nice example of the power of compounding. An extra 10 years gets you, a nice $40,000 bonus. To have $1 million when you retire at age 65, how much do you think you would need to put aside every year? Yes?
Is it B?
It is B, actually. Yay, you're the first try. So, come on up. And B, obviously when you look at that, that doesn't seem like a lot of money. Especially when you're thinking about that would include any free money that your employer is giving you in terms of a match. So if you start early, save consistently, get that employer match, you're going to be in pretty good shape for retirement. The thing that's bad news, unfortunately, on this part is $1 million at retirement may be way off from what you need. So it is still worth trying to think about your savings goal as a whole picture and not just shooting for a random number like $1 million. We've seen over the years people talk about, no, you really need 2.5 million, you really need this. It's a very individual number for folks depending on when you think you're going to retire. How long do you think you're going to live in retirement? Everybody is living longer, so if you're thinking you're going to have 40 years in retirement versus 30 or 20, maybe you need some more money. If your retirement is going to be traveling the world versus sitting at home and watching everything that has ever been on Netflix, then obviously you're going to have a different budget there. So you want to always be thinking about the that total goal, and it's a good option really to like work with somebody or play around with somebody's retirement calculators to get a sense of what you think your needs might be. And the average overdraft fee. Yes. You raised your hand before you knew the number?
I can't see that one. I think A.
It is not A. I wish it were A. It is C. It is C. And so the typical overdraft fee has been moving upward over the years. You know, last year it was 33, and it just keeps inching up. But the thing you need to know about this, especially as a younger person, about half of banks still do this nasty practice called check reordering, where at the end of the day they go through all of your transactions and they reorder all of your purchases from highest to lowest, and then at the end they factor in any deposits you've made. So what that means is if you had one overdraft during the day, maybe you thought it was worth it, it was for something important, you might actually find at the end of the day that you've been charged for 5 or 6 because they've done this check reordering to you. And instead of $34, you owe 100 and change. I did one of these presentations where a woman, like this was up on the screen for like 2 seconds. She raised her hand and she said, "I know what it is," and she proceeded to tell us that she had just been hit with it the week before. So it does happen, and it is something worth paying attention to when you're thinking about what bank you do business with. There are a lot of banks that do free accounts or low-cost accounts. Always look at the fees that you might be charged on that. And then within it, also try to pay attention to different protections you could put in place. Like you could set up your debit card so that it will not overdraw at point of sale. It maybe creates a little bit of embarrassment if you're out somewhere and you actually don't have enough money for that purchase. But temporary embarrassment versus a couple $100 in charges, not a bad trade-off. There are also some banks that will automatically shift money from savings into your checking for you if that's something that you want them to do, so that way you don't have to worry about overdrawing. You'll still pay a fee for that transfer, but it's much less than the cost of the overdraft. So let's see, and I think that is my last question there. I did pretty good on time, so I can run around. Yes.
When you were talking about budget systems before, like what budget system did you use?
So my husband and I use the youneedabudget.com. That's one of the ones where you pay for the software, but we decided that in the end it works for how we want to manage our money. I've also used Mint in the past, and I've played around with a lot of the other apps through work. You know, I think a lot of them, they're very good. You just, in the end, like you do kind of want to weigh all of those different factors to see what works well for you or not. There was another one I really liked that is now defunct called Level Money, that you could just open it up and you'd see at a glance, like if you were way over budget or if you still had some money to play with within that particular month or week. But sadly, they have gone away.
Thank you.
Yourself as a financial advisor, how are your articles structured?
In terms of the advice that I give,
Yeah.
or well, a lot of what I write about, it varies week to week. I just wrote something on how you can avoid having your lunch stolen at work. You know, it really they run the gamut. But I try to focus on news you can use for folks to help them better understand something, if it's a complex topic, or to make the most of it. One of my favorite pieces that I've written, I would say in the past, it was now a year ago, but was some of the exit costs you would face at work, because people don't think about when they job hop, they'll focus on getting a much bigger salary, but they don't realize they might be leaving bonus money on the table that hasn't come in, or they could face, some companies will charge you if you've technically used more vacation days than you've accrued. So you can have all these unexpected expenses with leaving a job if you don't get the timing just right. That answer your question? I was sort of, but yeah, it's a fun job, and I work a lot with different consumers who write in and they have questions, or even within my own coworkers, and then I get to answer it. It's also nice because then anytime I want to buy something or do something personally, I get to work out my own questions through my writing, which is good. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about your experience and kind of how you got into this role at CNBC?
Yes, we were talking about that before the session started. So when I was here at Ithaca, I was a journalism major. And at the time, it's like back in the dark ages, when you went to apply for jobs, like we literally mailed vanilla envelopes with clips. Like that's how backdated this is. But you know, you could focus on print journalism as a career, which is what I did. I didn't take any business classes. I was a anthro double major as well. But you know, I knew I wanted to write, I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I just happened to land a job at what was then CBS Market Watch. And it was an offshoot of CBS. Dow Jones purchased them right when I came in, and it became Market Watch from Dow Jones. And you know, I was writing about personal finance. My mentor and boss he was 70 at the time, and he was a known name in business journalism. So I was ghostwriting money tips as him, which was super intimidating because I knew nothing about the subject. So I was living in South Jersey, commuting into the city. It's about 2.5 hours each way by bus. And I would spend the entire time reading personal finance books and newspapers, anything I could get my hands on to better understand the subject. Grew to love it, went on to work at Smart Money, which then became Market Watch, and then at CNBC, and just kind of went from there. But I would say Ithaca really prepared me well in terms of the internships that I got, because there was that one internship that collected resumes, and my boss saw my resume, so that was really what helped me in the land. You know, all those manila envelopes I sent out came to nothing, except for a lot of postage costs. Anybody else? So I guess you're free to go, or I don't know what, but